right. Hello, Wi-Fi's. Welcome back to yet another underground transmission of the Wireless Woman. Go ahead and do me a favor, and I mean it this time, because y'all be leaving in and out of here without checking the attendance. I need you to leave me a like. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this channel and share the live. Tonight, I have one of my good buddies, one of my poet friends, Mr. Elliot Axiom, will be in the room with us. And I'm so excited about that. He was here months ago, back in the summertime, and we were redoing the conversation between James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni, and realizing that after 51 years, not much in the dialogue between black men and black women has changed. One of the greatest, the majority of the topic that we spoke about on that night was education, and how education is fueling back into our system of not really getting where we need to be as black people. Hey, Rashawn, welcome in, my dear. Can you drop me a headphones fire emoji and let me know? Okay, look and sound good. Yeah, thanks, babe. You already knew I was going to ask, because you know I'll get on here and be in silence. So I do have my good friend Elliot back with me tonight, and I'm watching him backstage, y'all. This is so funny. This is so funny as he back there dancing. But we're going to be talking more on education, because it just became such a large part of the discussion on the dynamics between black males and females, between nation building. You know, all of those things hinge on the children. I know, black men, black women, we love to argue with each other, but there are these little faces that are sitting in the background of this whole entire scene, the scenario that we're setting, and we have to consider whether we can see eye to eye or not, how we're going to impact the next generation and really start to push them into the place of being equipped with what they need in the changing dynamics that we see in the world. So I'm so glad to have Mr. Elliot Axiom with us today to have that discussion with me. Go ahead and help me out, Wi-Fi's. Give him a warm welcome coming into our live stream. Mr. Elliot Axiom. And yes, I have Rashawn. Rashawn, you're not a day one, but I'm gonna induct you into day one status at this point, because you hold me down. And he said we definitely need to revisit the chat. So I was reminding everyone of our discussion back in the summer when we came in here and recreated the Nikki Giovanni, James Baldwin discussion. And a lot of our discussion at that time did center around education.
It definitely did. What we looked at was the way in which black men and black women dealt with each other. And we learned that our experiences, though different, still had a common overview. And it seemed by design that we were being broken apart.
Yeah.
And where can you create such a design? Through education.
Absolutely.
And not necessarily only in school, but, you know, education in the sense of representation in the media, education in the sense of the way in which people are viewed by each other because they're being told to be viewed that way.
Exactly.
By external sources, you know? So.
Definitely. And you know how much I respect you. You know how much I listen to you as the bastion of male wisdom. So I do want to introduce the people to the fact that you are an artist. You are a wordsmith. You are definitely one of my very favorite spoken word artists. You know, I have a few because they're just so good.
Not a competition.
It's not a competition.
Okay.
But when it comes to the men who are able to compel in me the feelings and the emotions, who are able to make even me ponder on the things. You are one of the best. So I do want you to tell everyone in my audience who has not been privy to meeting you before today a little bit about your art and about yourself professionally that brings us to this conversation.
Okay. Well, my name is Elliot Axiom. I've been doing spoken word for a long time now. I spent 8 years working with and performing with the Bull City Slam team. And while on that Slam team, we became third in the nation, and we took the Southeast Regional, also known as Southern Fried Poetry Championship in
Yeah.
2010.
Southern
I'm a
Fried.
teaching artist. I've taught at high schools and detention centers. Uh, I've coached youth poetry teams to 3 championship years, one of my crowning achievements. I've traveled, and I've been a host of a show called the Solstice Lounge for about 6 or 7 years, right there in UNC Chapel Hill. It used to be on WCOM,
Nice. Nice.
brought in by my big brother, Cottonelle Murcott. And my work has always been centered on art and activism, and particularly the youth, but the diaspora in general. Professionally, my other profession, let me say that because I am a professional artist. Professionally, my other profession is education. I have a BA in psychology, minor in African American studies from the University of South Carolina, go Cox, and a master's degree in special education from the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, Aggie Pride. And I've been a special ed teacher for a couple of years. And before that, I was an instructional coach in the classroom, basically a teacher. And I've also done education administration. I was director of student services. So I've kind of seen it all from each side, from being the student to being the teacher to being the administrator to being the expert, and learning the curriculum, learning the pedagogy, and the ideologies of our present public school system. I have a unique perspective, and that perspective I plan on sharing with you guys today.
Absolutely. And you do. You really do. One of the things that brought us to this conversation, Elliot, nothing is off limits when it comes to me, was that I was having an issue with my 9-year-old son. So I have 2 sons, one's 18, one's 9, that are on very opposite ends of the spectrum. My younger son, however, has recently been put in a position with his teachers where they're not able to get him to engage in class. And so they started having the discussion with me that they had with my oldest son about getting him into a doctor for testing and medication. But when they pulled his test scores, he had tested off the charts. His benchmark was at 297, but he had scored a 485 on his test. And, I called you up because I was like, listen, how they going to tell me that my son, needs some sort of special education? But because of your experiences, you said that. You said, listen, it's not necessarily just that your child is, they may need to have interventions. He may need a different way to be able to learn. And so they have to address that as well. And when you put it to me like that, I was like, you know what? If they're not getting him to engage in class, and the point is his education, there may need to be some interventions made, not because he's slow, but because he is able to excel, but not under the current system. So that gave me a different way to think about it. So if you could kind of walk them through that discussion we were having, because as a special education teacher, people just automatically assume you're talking about the slow kids, but that isn't necessarily the case.
And what you said there's so much in there that we can unpack. I'm going to do it as quickly and as swiftly as I can. Number one is that the reason they send you to a doctor is because only a doctor can diagnose ADHD. School social worker can't do it, counselor can't do it, teacher can't do it, principal can't do it. Only a doctor can, a medical doctor. So in order for them to classify him as such, which if he was not engaging and he was hyperactive or he was, just off task, they would say that is, either attention deficit, meaning that he doesn't have the ability to pay attention, or he's hyperactive, he's doing too much. And in order for them to begin looking at social services, special needs services, he would have to have that diagnosis. Now, something that a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't even realize it until I became a special education teacher, is that advanced AIG, advanced intellectually gifted students, are special needs students. So people say they look at individuals who've been diagnosed with ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or ADD, attention deficit disorder, or IDD, intermittent explosive disorder, or all these other different things. But they don't look at the other side of the spectrum, which is a child who, I don't want to say is smarter than the teacher, but a child whose intellect is comparable to what is being taught. And so it's basically, if you're sitting in a room and you're in a 2-hour class teaching you how to play tic-tac-toe, you already know how to play tic-tac-toe. What are you going to do? And so we look at the AIG students as well as special needs, because they will be
zone out.
They'll zone out. They got it. They got it in the first 10 minutes. Now the teacher can't stop teaching in 10 minutes. So that's why they're special needs. So if Marcus gets it in 10 minutes, the rest of the class, middle of the class, is going to take 45 minutes. And my students who are slower learners are going to take 1 hour and 15 minutes. I'm going to have to add some extra stuff for them. The teacher needs to know that Marcus is special needs as well. I need to have some stuff ready for him. Otherwise, he's going to be bored. And then here comes some behavior problems.
Yeah.
So all of those things fall into that.
Yeah, well, one of the first things that they said, and they've said it about both my boys, neither one of them were a behavior problem at all. So it became tough to figure out, how do we get them to engage? Now, I know in one of the videos that we're going to show during this live, they talk about that gap between the 3rd grade and the 4th grade, where they do begin to see, particularly Black boys, begin to fall behind in the education system. Do you think that this has more to do with the way we educate students, even with all of this changing technology? In my opinion, very little about the way we educate children has changed. Or do you think that it's on the other side of the spectrum, which is there is a developmental issue there with these boys, or do you think it's a combination of both?
You spoke about the spectrum. There is a spectrum. And, there are a couple of things we're going to touch on really quickly. Number one, the big deal in education, especially when it comes to boys in general, Black boys in particular, is that 3rd to 4th grade jump. Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu calls it the 4th grade syndrome. This is what happens. From K to 3, students are taught to read. They are taught, they learn how to read. From the 4th grade on, they read to learn. That is a huge jump from learning how to do something to then having to learn from doing the thing that you've learned. Maybe somewhere in there should be, another year of combining the two, possibly. So that's one big thing. Another thing, and this is something that Dr. Kunjufu talks about, is Black boys have a tendency to be kinesthetic learners. They need to move. They're tactile learners. They need to touch. They need hands-on. Now, they're not the only ones. Most boys in general need and learn better that way. Girls, they can sit and learn in the same sense of the way that education has been taught for decades, the lecture style, like when you go to college, when you're sitting there. Very teacher-centric. Teachers are from.
But there's a difference between the socialization of girls versus boys. And I think there's a difference between the cultural socialization as well, because when we get students that are coming from China or coming from the Middle East, you know, they're so much more adept to seminar style learning than when you think about it, you know, our boys, and you know, I'm always way over here out there. Our boys were denied the ability to be educated for many, many years, and they have been a part of the workforce. Because I don't know if you've seen it in your research or not, so I'm going to ask, because, you know, this is Ask Elliot. I don't know what
Go
I'm
ahead
talking
and
about.
ask him.
Do you think, just because I noticed that blacks and Hispanics both tend to be more of the working class, are there these same lags in the Hispanic population as well? Like from a socialization point of view?
Yes, and also it varies. Because what you will have is you have the cultural difference between black and Hispanic, with black and Hispanic, depending on where you are in the country. Because when I grew up, excuse me, on the East Coast, we had a Black and Latin alliance, whereas on the West Coast, there's like a battle between like black and Hispanic people. So they're two different cultures here. One culture is the former lower working class, and another one, the Hispanic, is the present lower working class. And
New
so there's a
slaves.
clash there and a battle.
Yeah, and when you have those latchkey kids that are coming home to, you know, working class parents, they don't necessarily have either the ability or the time, you know, to read with these children, to reinforce, to do homework, to show up for parent teacher conferences and things like that. That's different than college educated, you know, office working parents that have that ability, you know, to educate their children more at home as well.
You think about it, an analogy would be if I had a bunch of tennis balls, okay? And I give the black kid 20 tennis balls. I give the Hispanic kid 10 tennis balls. I give the Asian kid 50 tennis balls, and I give the white kid 100 tennis balls. And I tell them to all hit this target as many times as they can, and they get points for as many times as they can hit the target, right? So the white kid, the Asian kid have more opportunities to hit the target than the black and Hispanic kid. Well, those tennis balls are words. They have vocabulary. And one of the great predictors of how well someone will do in school is how well they read. One of the great predictors of how well someone reads is their vocabulary. Now, we're not talking about 10, 15, 20. We're talking about students going in and they are down thousands of words just from what they hear in the household, just from a parent reading to them, just from
Even just the vernacular that the parent uses as well, because they can't be socialized behind a vocabulary they don't use. Do you think this plays a big part into the standardized testing, the language that's used on standardized testing?
Definitely. Something that I'm a big proponent of, although I haven't heard it, well, I have heard it in different ways, is the fact that Hispanic children, a lot of them will come in, they will have an English deficit because their parents don't speak English, period. And then the fact that black kids are also at a disadvantage because, and I say black kids, but also low individuals who are low income, because they also speak a different language. We call it African American Vernacular English. Some people call it Ebonics, but whatever you call it,
yeah,
whatever you call
but
it,
see, they at least address it.
English.
Right, but they at least address it with the ESL, you know, classes for these students, the understanding that they're going to have that shortfall. But, you know, black children are expected to compete at the same level. Boys are expected to compete with girls, even though their learning styles are going to be very different. So I think having this one size fits all education standard is where we're starting to have those issues. Now, I know you had some graphs You're such a
Hmm.
teacher. You're such a teacher. That kind of
Hmm.
exhibit some of those things that we were talking about. So,
Right. Um, and actually, the graph that I was, well, let me touch on something quickly, then we'll go to the graph. You mentioned the ESL, and you're 100% correct. However, black kids don't get ESL, but they still speak two languages.
and don't. And they're just now, I forget what his name is, but he's some yo chow something, but he does the AAVE at Harvard now,
Hmm.
where he's talking about how those language patterns are different for, Geechee Americans, for the AAVE, and how it is English. It's just a
Hmm.
different way it's reimagined.
Exactly. And also, when we talk about slang, African American vernacular English, it, like black people, is not a monolith. There are different dialects within AAVE. There are places I can go and talk to a black person who's speaking their type of AAVE and have no idea what they're talking about. Talking about little Geechee, little Gullah, you know, and I saying, and you have an accent that coming is real thick, and you're talking to them and you can't understand a word they say, no. And I'm standing there and I'm having my conversation. I'm speaking my Brooklyn, whatever. This is how we do, son. We feel. What I'm saying. And then the cat from the West Coast come through and they're talking about gang and hella. We are speaking almost three different total languages, right? But that's lumped in into one thing. But even though lumped in, it's not addressed in the regular curriculum.
That's what I was gonna say. There's no. I see a lot of like immersion schools, a lot of curriculum that is being developed around, children that are coming from different countries. Like I was a part of the International Baccalaureate system, and that
Mm-hmm.
in and of itself incorporated certain education styles that were very different. And I say this word wrong every time. Don't care. It's one of the, but
Montessori.
Montessori. Okay, I
Mm-hmm.
knew it was one or the other,
You
but
got
you see Montessori
it. Mm-hmm.
schools that are bringing in different cultures of learning styles, but none of those are African. None of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we're gonna touch on that, and we'll actually come back to uh, that spectrum of disabilities because we're going to talk about, believe it or not, preferred and unpreferred disabilities, which also affect Black and Brown people disproportionately. But we're talking about culture. Now, we can look at culture in education a whole bunch of different ways. But regardless of how you look at it, if you are connected to someone, and I'm sharing now, are we able to see it on the screen? You make me feel like
Yes,
I'm back
sir.
in the classroom.
Yes, sir. I have your screen up for you, and everyone is able to see it.
Okay, so what we're looking at here on these two charts, we're looking at on the left, students. Now, this I believe is from 2020 or 2021. The link for this is actually down in the comments section put there by the wireless woman herself. So you can do your own research because I definitely suggest that. So
Yeah,
on the
these are
left,
in the description box for everyone that wants to follow along.
we're looking at during this year, let's say 2020. This is the breakdown, the cultural ethnic breakdown of students in the United States. So we have Black at 16%. We have Hispanic at 26%. And so for my Black people, you can see that we are no longer the majority minority, which also makes a big difference when it comes to voting, capital distribution, funding, all those things. And no, it's not a battle between Black and Hispanic. It should be a collaboration between Black and Hispanic
Should
because,
be.
we are not considered part of the dominant culture. And
Yeah.
up here we have other individuals. We have Asian, Indigenous, Pacific Islander, um, and they'll probably have a section for multi-race or
Yeah,
multi.
more than one race.
Mhm. So if you look at this chart, our white students, the white babies, they are 49% of the student population. That means other non-then white are 51%. So we are moving to that place where America becomes a minority majority country. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's
And
jump
let's
over.
be honest, a lot of them students that are identifying as white, not all of them are
And this,
ethnically white, even if they're racially white.
and that is also a big thing. If you have taken the census or you filled out a job application, you will see when they ask about your race, they have, white, black, whatever, etc. Then they ask about your culture, and there's usually two questions: Hispanic or non-Hispanic.
That's it. That's all.
So that
Yeah.
actually says something to our Hispanic friends, that even though you may consider yourself white, the system doesn't quite, or they would ask whether you're Hispanic or non-Hispanic.
Yeah, it would be almost asking the same question twice.
Mhm.
Yeah, but if they're making that distinction, they're making it for a reason.
And that applies if I put Black African American, I also still have to click non-Hispanic. So there's a reason for that. I don't know the depth of that reasoning. Somebody go ahead and research that. And
Yeah, well, my children are biracial.
Mhm.
My oldest two, anyway, and that's always been their designation is Black and Hispanic, and they
Mhm.
make them Hispanic every time, but they're
Every
still going to
time.
make them Black as well.
Mhm.
So when they're doing those numbers on ethnicity, I can only speculate to the fact that they are tracking this number that you're looking at right here to see how many people are identifying in that people group for some specific reason. But my
Mhm.
children are considered Black and ethnically Hispanic, what they would call Afro-Latina, but they
Mhm.
still categorize them in most instances as being Hispanic only.
Right. And like you, I'm unaware of the exact reasoning behind those classifications, but we can touch on that a little further a little later on. Let's jump over here to the teachers. The number of Hispanic teachers, 8%, as compared to 26% of Hispanic students. The number of Black teachers, 7%, as compared to 16% of Black students. We look over at further non-white teachers, and the percentages get even lower. And then we look at the percentage of white teachers, 82%. Now, so what does that mean? Well, for me, that meant I didn't see a Black male teacher until middle school. That meant I didn't see a Black female teacher till the third grade, and she was the only one I ever had. That means that the cultural differences, even if it's not intentional, are going to be there. It means that we need to, number one, in the immediate deal, be able to have a curriculum in which the white teachers are taught how to teach Black boys. And we're going to watch a little video about this just a second, so you can go ahead and start getting ready to cue that up.
Okay.
Now we'll go a little further into this, and we look at the Black teachers. Of this 7% of Black teachers, only 2% of those Black teachers are male. Although the science indicates and shows that every race and gender benefits from, one, cultural diversity, two, specifically having a Black male teacher. And so,
Oh, sorry.
you're fine.
I didn't think it was gonna key up and start playing right over top of your video. Hold on.
So, we talked a little bit about Dr. Kwanzaa Kunjufu. Excuse me, Kwanzaa Kunjufu. I always get it messed up. We're going to watch a quick video, and he's going to speak on, I think it's Urban Prep Academy and the way in which they teach Black boys. And you'll notice something glaring as we watch it. So, if you will, I'm
Okay,
going to stop sharing.
I'm ready now. I'm gonna be a good a good assistant. I got you now. Okay, here we go.
All right, let's get it.
Almost 50% of our population is African American males. Yet African Americans are only 12% of the U.S. population. And I think what's driving this penal population is the dropout rate. Our dropout rate is a result of our boys not mastering reading, being inappropriately placed in special education, and a myriad of other factors. Participants who take this class in best practices for African American male students, they will first understand Black culture, Black male culture, Black learning styles. They will learn how to secure the most from their students. When Black children think that being smart is acting white, it's because they have not been taught their history and their culture.
I like being at this school because it's a lot of culture surrounding us.
I like it because, well, you learn a lot about your history, and not only that you just learn about African history, you learn a lot about other history too.
African American students in the classroom become, disenfranchised with their education really early on.
A boy scored at the beginning of third grade, how high?
98%.
98%. How do we explain how Black boys could do so well K-3, and then this tremendous decline from the third or fourth grade on? What do you think is happening to large numbers of Black boys who are kinesthetic learners?
They're underperforming because the way in which they learn is not ever being activated.
If you are a Black male kinesthetic learner, tactile learner, oral learner, 4th through 12th grade, where do they send you? To special ed. Question, is special ed the new form of segregation?
African American males, they are capable, but you have to seriously look at and do some soul searching in terms of the strategies that are being used and be intentional in terms of catering your teaching style to those young men.
You could do all the changes that an IEP requires without actually labeling the child special education. So the change of curriculum, the change of classroom setting.
I want you to say that again. That was prophetic. The 1% that owns almost 95% of the wealth, they did not earn it in the NBA, nor rap, nor the streets. Can you imagine if you had a class where half the class buys Nike shoes and the other half buys Nike stocks, and every first day of the month we compare the value of the shoes to the stock? I bet that could reduce the dropout rate.
All right, gentlemen, answers 3, 2, 1, hold them up. All teams have positive. That one is positive. Team Allen. So Wilson shooting for Team Allen.
So I try to be as provocative as I can each day. I try to be a little entertaining, but also just using some things that they can relate to.
Zuckerberg heard of a great idea, right, of this social website. He heard this idea from some people that were talking about it, but Mark Zuckerberg knew that if I got to this first, if I take advantage of this opportunity first, then I stand to gain the most. Spain and Portugal knew that if they got their hands in the slave trade first, then they were going to be the individuals who were able to benefit from the slave trade the most.
The biggest thing is gaining those relationships with the kids very early on, and learning what they're interested in, learning what their strengths are, learning what their weaknesses are.
What's their favorite store? What kind of clothes do they like to wear? Why? And you could go so many different places with that. Where the clothes were made, how much it's cost. You can throw math problems in there. You can incorporate getting to know them through your lesson.
Just becoming that person who's really consistent and really credible. And so I think just to make it really safe for them to have a trusting relationship with you.
We have to find ways to bond with these students, especially Black males. It has nothing to do with race or gender. It's time on task, expectations, and connecting with your students by understanding and appreciating and acknowledging their learning styles.
Well, that was super dope. I have 3 things,
Go ahead.
and I want to give you my 3 things before we go on. So one thing I would say is I saw this with my son when there is that lag in comprehension. You know, he lost a lot of confidence. He would come back home like, I feel stupid, you know, when he's bright kid, super bright, clearly from the test scores. But like you said, the comprehension comes from not having different ways to approach problem solving. So splintering off from that, I have always actually, you know, most of the time with Black females, you don't see that same thing. And I think it has a lot to do with socialization. We're socialized from a young age to, you know, sit down, to be engaging. We have more words, so our comprehension can be a little bit higher. It doesn't even mean our understanding is higher, clearly, because sometimes you be talking to us and we just talking about what we thinking because we already 8 steps ahead of you, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're actually comprehending. But I didn't start to recognize that my learning style was different till I got all the way in college, and I was in my Chinese civilizations class. I'll never forget. We had a teacher, white teacher, teaching Chinese civilization, and he would sit on his desk and he would talk for a smooth hour and a half, and his participation in his class was taking notes. And so I wasn't taking notes, and he addressed me, you know, after the first couple of weeks of class. He said, hey, listen, if you don't start taking these notes, you're gonna fall behind. You know, there's no book for this. Like, you really need to be taking the notes. And I'm like, listen, I got you. Like, I think I'm going to be straight, you know. And he was like, no, I'm telling you, you're going to fail this class if you don't start taking notes. Because I was in class every day. Sleep a lot of times, but I was there. And when we got to the final, I made a 99. And I was pissed about that 99. I had a 99 average in his class because I actually am an audible learner. I retain the most of what people are saying. Don't ask me to put my hands on it, because if I put my hands on it, I'm probably going to forget what you said. And if I forget what you said, I don't have it. And so, you know, you have tactile learners, visual learners, audible learners. There are so many different ways that you can learn, and they don't actually teach to all of that. Like, he was convinced you are gonna fail. And I kept telling him, like, nah, I think I got it. And when I went into the workforce, it was the same thing. Like, when I started working on 911, my trainer, she was like, you got to do it this way. Like, if you don't do it this way, I can't guarantee your results. And I was like, if we do it this way, I can guarantee the results. I ain't going to have it. And so we had a 4-week, of phase 1 training. Right. And the first 2 weeks, I took her book from her, and she was like, well, I got to put something in here every day. Like, I got to say we did this and we did that. I said, say whatever you want to say, but I'm telling you, this is what it's going to take for me to get it. So the first 2 weeks, I did nothing. And I know she was frustrated because she was like, listen, we gonna fall behind. I was like, listen, just go with me. And literally in the 3rd week, I was like, all right, excuse me. And I just took over. I had my headset on. I was like, all right, units, I need all units to head towards. And I just took off. And she was like, how? So we have it ingrained in us that learning can only be accomplished and quantified in a certain way. Do you think, and we talked about this before we got on here, do you think we have schools like Morehouse, you know, we see a lot more success with these Black male learners when they're separated and taught to a specific way that may not necessarily be the way that other people are educated? Do you think we can achieve educational, balance with everyone in the system, or do you think we need to be divergent?
Yes. Now, I said that to make you do what you just did. For one, students, you have a monkey, a bear, a fish, and an elephant. And if you judge them all by the test of climbing a tree, there's 3 of them that are going to think they're idiots all their lives, right? Students are people. People are different. People learn differently. You learn orally. And you didn't write things down because that step from hearing to comprehending to writing would have been an impediment to you. I am a visual learner. I like to see it, but I'm also an auditory learner. I can hear it, okay? I know some people who have to write down every note specifically because that writing is them getting in their mind, their comprehension. A lot of poets do that. When they write the poem, they're also memorizing it. So to answer your question, can it be done? Yes. It's going to take a lot. Let me finish and I'll get to you. As you saw in the video, there was a whole variety of ethnicities, genders, and cultures. But they all were following a curriculum specifically designed for Black boys, and there should be curriculum specifically designed for Black kids in general. However, there is no substitute for having a school specifically designed to educate these Black children. Now pause, because somebody right now is typing. They're thinking, well, you talking about segregation. Yes and no. Number one, I'm not talking about segregation in the sense of dividing people because you think one group of people is better than the other. I'm talking about segregation in the way in which it was, where one group of people, Black, realized that they had to take ownership, responsibility for their own education because they were not going to be taught correctly anyplace else. Well, desegregation kind of proved that. Then once we went out and assimilated into other schools, the level of Black education, and this is my opinion, went down. Now, the second part, am I talking about segregation? Well, if you said that, then you'd have to go and tell me, is a Christian parochial school segregation? You'd have to tell me if an affluent white charter school in Cary, North Carolina is segregation. You'd have to tell me if an Afrocentric school in Winston-Salem, North Carolina is segregation. You'd have to tell me if a Hasidic Jewish school in New York is segregation. This is not anything new. So if we are talking about the fact that Black students would do better in Black schools, that is not segregation.
It's not. I mean, when you think about people being educated around the value systems, like you said, when it comes to Christian schools, when it comes to Islamic schools, you know, these children are being educated in and by and for the communities wherein they live. Do you think having this approach to education would help to create incentive for there to be more Black educators? Because out of the large amount of teachers that we see leaving the system at this present time, they are disproportionately minorities.
Right, and I'm glad you brought it back, because you know we'll be sitting here and talking about Black education the whole time. But the answer to your question to me is yes. There are a plethora of reasons that Black educators are leaving. Full transparency, I am one of those Black educators that has left. I am presently not working in education for various reasons. We won't get into all of those.
Please get into it. Please go. I'm typing you a note right now that says talk about the lack of support, because, you know, this was a big part of the discussion that we had.
Well, I'm going to touch on two things that I'm going to share, and then we're going to look at another chart. Don't worry, I'm not going to chart you out to death tonight. But teachers in general are leaving the profession in droves because teachers are a beat up profession. Anything that goes wrong, blame the teachers. Okay. And there are so many rules and accords and things that go on in teaching that you would not believe, that make the job incredibly difficult.
Give me an example.
Okay. I'm a teacher. I have 4 periods a day, and I have 1 planning period. Okay. I have 1 planning period in which I am supposed to, if I work to record, get all of my stuff done for my classes, my other 4 classes. Now,
you said work to record?
Work to record, meaning if I work from the time that I'm supposed to come in to the time that I'm supposed to leave, and then when I leave at 3:45, 4 o'clock, I leave all my school stuff at school and go home.
Okay.
That's work to record. acting your wage. Okay. Now, this is why teachers can't do it. I have one planning period. Okay. If I teach one subject, one part of one subject, it's a small possibility I could do it. Small, very small. If I teach more than one subject, if I had that one planning period, there's no way in the world I can do it because I got to do subjects for all these other classes. Okay. Somebody might be out there saying, well, that's you need to budget your time better. Well, here's the problem with that. On Monday, I have my grade level meeting during my planning period. On Tuesday, I have my department English meeting during my planning period. On Wednesday, special education, I have my special education meeting during my planning period. On Thursday, I have SEL, social emotional learning, and or a professional development during my planning period. On Friday, I have my planning period. So I have one planning period, 45 to 60 minutes to do all of my planning for all of my classes. And that's a typical week. So beat up profession, yes, and all those other things have to be done because they have to be reported to the higher ups, the superintendents. Then that goes to the Secretary of Education. Look at what we're doing in this Title I school. We're doing all these things that we're supposed to do. However, now those teachers, where they're doing their planning?
At home.
And there's a teacher shortage, so what
they're covering other classes.
You might be covering another class, and they might even pay you for it. But now I don't have a planning period at all. And do remember when I say that teachers don't get lunch breaks, and they really don't get bathroom breaks.
Bathroom breaks, yeah, that's what I was hearing.
It's a beat up profession, and people who go into it love teaching. I love teaching. I love it. And you find people who are dedicated, you know that you can put as much on them and even more than they can take because they're there for the kids.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to share something. Okay. So it's going to take a step back and then we're going to move forward. We look at studies show that the effect of having a black male teacher, especially between the grades 3 and 5, remember we talked about that gap, and also remember that in the 3rd grade and the 5th grade is where they give those tests, and that kind of set where that student is going to be. There's also talk that during the 3rd grade and the 5th grade, those tests that are taken are what they use, the scores of those tests. They use those people who fail those tests to create the budget for the number of cells that will be needed in new prisons. And it's one of the reasons why there are more prisons being built in schools. Do your research on that on your own. But having that teacher a black male teacher between the ages of the grades of 3 and 5 decreases the dropout rate among black male students by 30%. Decreases the dropout rate among black male students by 30%. That in and of itself should have you running out, grabbing any and everybody even remotely qualified to come in. Okay.
Right. But it is those those elementary grade teachers that are making the least, like financially wise. So for a black man, it just isn't going to be lucrative if you are in education to be in those grades anyway.
And those grades specifically, elementary school, are looked at in culture as being women's grades. Teaching profession in and of itself is looked at as being a woman, and it is woman dominated, which, is not a problem unless you look at the fact that people look at teachers and think feminine. And then we know with, the black machismo, men want to be seen as men. That's changing a little bit.
That's where you get the black male administrators, principals, service workers, but not in the classroom. There was one, skit or whatever, where they had the janitor watching the class. I think it's Abbott Elementary or something like that. And like you said, that's like the most exposure those kids are even having to a black male,
Right. Think about the mental picture of the only black man you see in the school is the one that's cleaning up after you. Not that there's anything wrong with being a janitor. They make more money than
Nothing at
teachers in
all.
a lot of places.
More often than not.
All right, so
Yeah.
let's look at why we have a black exodus of teachers from the profession. And I'm sure this can be generalized to all teachers, but we're talking about specifically black male teachers here. And I know that this can be very closely put with black female teachers or black woman teachers. Number one, dissatisfied with the administration. Anybody with a job knows that a lot of times you're dissatisfied with the administration, management, supervisor, etc. The problems here is that, when you have an administration that is not for you, it affects more than just the things that you can think. It affects the things that you can do and even the ways in which you can teach. Dissatisfied with accountability testing. Part goes to that cultural thing. Teachers get paid bonuses when they get higher scores. And so you have a whole class of teachers, special education teachers being one, that very often will not get those bonuses because their students are not going to get those higher scores. But also this falls to what you said, education being cultural and quantifiable. If you can't quantify education through a test, then our school system does not recognize it as beneficial or reaching the benchmarks.
Right, but then you have people who are reverse engineering education to just teach to these tests.
Exactly.
You
and
know?
who's going to stop them? Or who is going to say you're doing it wrong if their test scores are better than this school test scores? A charter school I once worked for, we actually had to go to court and fight with the charter school board because they were saying that the charter school wasn't doing what it was supposed to, and it had to show the growth of the students. It had to compare it not to the entire school system, but to schools with comparable populations. And when that was done, it showed that the school was doing excellent because we were growing students, and that's what education should be about. You want all these students in the 7th grade to get an 80 on this test, but if I have 100 students and 30 do it, but I have 50 students who got a 15 in the beginning and got a 60 at the end, we doing a bang-up job.
Absolutely.
But the test scores aren't showing it, and so that affects everything from funding to how many teachers you can have.
Okay.
Student discipline problems.
I really want you to narrow in on that one because you were talking when we were preparing for this about how a lot of times black teachers who you've already shown from your charts are in the minority, are charged with being the ones who deal with the disciplinary problems of the children in their culture when they're already disproportionately outnumbered by them.
Exactly. A lot of times, black male teachers will become black male enforcers for a school that is predominantly not of that culture. What will wind up happening is the black male teachers will, and this may be generalizable to all male teachers or all strong teachers, but I have specifically seen it in my experience as a black male teacher, that the students who are the wildest or who have the most behavior problems are usually sent to that black male teacher. And a lot of times it's because we have a strong dominant personality. We're not generally going to take the disrespect, etc., from the student. We're not all bulking hulks or ogres, but we have a presence about us. And then
it's the same. Oh, I apologize.
No, go
it's
ahead.
The same reason why you would want a black male in your house. It's seen to be more intimidating, but you don't want to be the pit bull of your administration. But I saw this with my 9-year-old son, because that's the first thing they did in the meeting. They brought in a black man named Mr. Wilson, and they were like, we're going to have him, to mentor Lewis and start to check in with him. So clearly on one end, they see the importance of the mentoring relationship with black men, but then they don't reward you and equip you with what you need to be in a position of respect when it comes to the administration, though. But they prop you up that way in front of the kids.
And that's what it is. One of the reasons, and you hit to the core of it, that I believe that black teachers are exiting the system and the school system so much and so quickly is that the school system is failing the teachers the same way in which it's failing the students. They don't understand the best way in which to help them grow. They don't understand the cultural diversity which makes them as effective as they are. I'm not saying that any other culture is not an effective teacher, but we have our own, means and ways and procedures that are obviously effective in dealing with especially black children.
Yeah, Denzel Washington had a they were talking to him about why he used a black director for what was the Tennessee Williams movie that he did, and he said, Fences, and he said, listen, Martin Scorsese could have done Schindler's List, and I forget who the director was. He could have done Goodfellas. He said, but it's culture. You want to have someone that is making art for the culture, who's from the culture because they get the culture. But it's like you said, we're already in a system that disrespects and doesn't teach to the culture. But now you want to use this person as a hollow figurehead that really doesn't have any other power other than just being the token.
Or the ogre. And I've had two different experiences when it comes to that. I've had the experience of a school where it was supported. And so, the black male teachers, they had that discipline influence, but they also had the opportunity to show the students how much we cared about them. When we had students say, Mister, I want you to come to my soccer match. Well, I don't play soccer, never have played soccer. But when I was asked by this student who was a female soccer player, I want you to come to my soccer match, I was at her soccer match. And you could see the difference, And we all have those kind of experiences, but when you get the quote unquote mean teacher and they're looking out for you too, you can't get away with it, but that they're going to back you up if you're right. That makes a world of difference. I'm going to jump on the rest of these really quickly, and then we can get back to seeing the face and dance of the wireless woman. Student discipline problems. We just talked about the fact that a lot of black male teachers, but black teachers in general, are usually the disciplinarians in the school or the ones that those difficult students are sent to. We can a lot of times deal with them. The problems that come here are those students who, one, we are unable to. Two, we are not backed up by administration when they become such a discipline problem that they disrupt the class. And I personally have experienced this. It was horrible. We're not going to get into all of that. Lack of influence and autonomy. This right here, and we're talking about culture, Afrocentric, etc., things along those lines. Well, you know what? There is an anti-woke agenda. And this anti-woke agenda right now is trickle-down economics of white supremacy. I'm just be honest with you 100%. It's saying to you that I can't teach a kid that slavery was wrong. It's saying to you that I look in a history book where it says, and this is literal, I think it's the Horton McGraw, I believe, where it says that the indigenous Americans were asked to leave a state and they did, glossing over the Trail of Tears and the forced migration of an entire race. You don't want me to teach truth. You don't want me to teach history. You want me to teach indoctrination.
Miseducation.
Miseducation. There you go. Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. Another great book that everybody should read. Lack of influence and autonomy. Poor workplace conditions. A lot of Title I schools. I remember in Baltimore not too long ago, the kids and the teachers had to wear coats inside the schools. Poor workplace conditions also falls under the way in which schools are funded. School funding comes from the tax base of the area in which the school resides. What that means is a rich school gets more money than a school in a lower income neighborhood. So where are the teachers going to go? Where they're paid better, where they have smart boards and not have to use only a whiteboard. You know, they have the technology, they actually have a computer lab. Poor workplace conditions, classroom intrusions, poor salary and benefits, dissatisfied with teaching assignment, and class size is too large. All of those fall into it. These are the top reasons that Black educators are leaving the field. How do you address it? What is the solution? I believe that there's going to have to be, as far as public school, I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
The last school I went to used something called ARC, American Reading Company. And they had a curriculum and it's based on these 4 genres of books, and they have all this stuff worked out, and it's a good system. The problem was none of the books which they had a Black protagonist.
Wow.
And so I'm teaching in a classroom with, well, let me rephrase that. There was one book that had a Black protagonist, and it was taught at the end. But the majority of the material, the majority of the curriculum, the children could not see themselves within it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many times are you going to, want to read about the greatness of somebody else?
Yeah, and people, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Please finish.
Changing curriculum. Change in the way in which we deal with teachers overall, because it is a beat up profession.
Yeah.
The way that we look at how we're going to educate the individual student, because they are individual students.
Exactly.
You need the time, you need the money. In my opinion, it should never be a classroom with less than 2 teachers in it.
I agree.
Just period.
I agree. All the way up until I was in about 4th or 5th grade, we had 2 teachers, and they had bus monitors. There's a lot of behaviors that go on just getting these kids to and from schools that need to be monitored as well. If you have suffered violence the whole way to school, you're not going to be engaged when you get in the classroom.
I'm glad you said that. I'm going to touch on 2 things really quickly. One is the fact that teachers everywhere don't just teach. They are hall monitor, lunchroom monitor. You are with these kids constantly, walk them out to the bus, get them from the bus. You have to go through all of these things as a teacher that have nothing to do with teaching. In my opinion, like I said, it should be more than 1 teacher in every class. Teachers should not have to step outside their door. They should be able to wait in their door and should greet students as they come in and as they leave. But it should be hall monitors that have nothing to do with and whoever it is that deals with that part of it, because that's where a lot of behaviors happen. That's where a lot of the counseling and therapy can happen. And the last part, I'm going to share this last chart. I told you I wasn't going to chart y'all to death, but I'm going to share this last chart.
I put in the private chat that I love charts, by the way.
I saw the
I love your PowerPoint presentation. Makes me feel like I'm in class. And a lot of things that people say really do, stick with me. And I think it has to be a very revolutionary way that we begin to look at educating, because, when we started this off before I pulled you in, I was talking about how the whole dynamic between Black men, Black women, nation building, all of these things come out of the education system. So if we got white supremacy all in, you took it down, where'd it go?
Yeah, I want to finish again what you said.
if we have white supremacy all in the way that we approach the education system, then it's no wonder why, we're growing up as fully grown proponents of the system, and we're seeing it degrade our community instead of give us the skills to build it. And they told us that, if you go to these colleges, you get educated, you do these things, we will integrate you into our systems. And now we're seeing, like Martin Luther King saw, that we're being integrated into a house that's on fire, without even having a cup of water, without even having the tools that we need to actually be of any service, to actually really preserve our own legacy and lineage through these processes.
Yeah. While many of the residents in that house have either already evacuated or are evacuating, and we're still on the bottom floor, not even knowing that there's an upstairs.
Very true, because someone was saying that they were, Joanza Kunjufu said that, even with what he was saying about how, most of the affluent people didn't do it through, rap and ball playing and all that stuff. Neither did the billionaire. Elon Musk, Bill Gates. These people were not highly educated people either. Mark Zuckerberg, most of them were college dropouts. So,
and most of them acquired or stole something from somebody else, and it's what made them rich. We won't touch on that right now because they might
another day.
So what we're looking at here is Maslow's hierarchy of need, and basically what this says is these are all the things that need to occur before we can reach the top. And the top is the self-actualization. So when we talk about education, talk about teachers leaving, we talk about bad education. No, well, I won't say bad education, but we talk about miseducation or inadequate education, or education is not being taken advantage of by low-income individuals. In particular, we're talking about Black boys and Black girls and children of color. We first look at what you need. You touched on it. If you come into a classroom and you've had violence done to you all the way there, you don't want to learn. Before you can do anything at all, you need to look at the physiological needs. Those physiological needs: air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. We can move the reproduction because we're talking about the babies. Air, water, food, shelter, sleep, and clothing. Kids' clothes clean? Did they sleep last night, or were the parents arguing all night? Do they have lights on in their shelter? Did they have food to eat, or are they coming to school strictly to eat? Did they have enough water to take a shower? Air. Do they have air conditioning? Do they have heat? Did they come to school cold or hot because they didn't have those things? So you need those first, then you jump to these safety needs. You just talked about Social Security, employment, resources, health, property. That goes to the shelter, that goes to the drive to school, etc. So if you have both of those, then we look at love and belonging, friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection. Here is where you see a lot of kids from middle-class, affluent families. This is where they get stuck. A lot of kids in lower income families get stuck at the physiological needs and the safety needs. And then we bring all this up, we get to this love and belonging. That's where a lot of these children are stuck and hit before they even get to the classroom. Then we look at esteem, respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, freedom. Here is where your isms come in. Your sexism, your racism, your classism. This is where, am I as good as so-and-so? Are my sneakers better than what's her name? Am I cuter than this person? Am I enough? Am I enough? And then once you get past 3 to 4 levels, then you get to self-actualization. This is the desire to become the most that one can be. This is where learning occurs.
Wow.
Now think about the kids that you know. Think about these students in these low-income households. Think about Black students, regardless of financial status. Think about girls. This was one of my big things I remember, and it still hurts me to this day. As a English teacher, I was also in charge of the yearbook. And whenever I would go around and I'd pull out my camera, all of the girls would hide their faces. And
Wow.
all I could think was, who has taught these beautiful, strong, phenomenal young women that they are ugly?
Yeah. And I got to be honest, I've seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I'm shocked to find that esteem is that high up, on the platform, and that it really stands between people being able to survive and self-actualize. It's wild that esteem is such a big thing, and I think because Black people are so used to pretending or using, because here in esteem it talks about respect, status, recognition, strength, freedom. But we use so many things that are actually down in the psychological needs, like clothing, shelter, cars. We are deriving self-esteem from things that are really just physiological needs,
Or
and
aesthetic.
and stepping over love and belonging, and creating safety. Because like you said, a lot of these kids are coming to school with the latest Nikes on, and then they're going to go home and walk in the door and be slapped across the head by their parent. They don't feel safe when they come home. And then we'll say to these same kids, like, you're nothing. Why don't you have, we will wonder as we grow up why we don't have self-esteem. Because I know I'm going on a tangent, but this is what we do over here.
Let's go.
I'm noticing that a lot. There's a lot of insecurity with men, and when you talk to them, they'll say some stuff, and I'm like, let me dig a little bit, let me scratch the surface, and it never fails. Some woman rejected them in middle school. They never had the nicest clothing. They never, and now, like you were talking about, jobs employment that could create fulfillment for you. It's like, nah, I don't want that, because in order for me to have my self-esteem intact, I need to have a Benz. I need to chase the big fish. And a lot of self-actualization never really comes because you skip over those steps that are supposed to help build you up to that place of being able to walk in your self-actualization without feeling like you have what they call imposter syndrome.
And you touched on it exactly. That's where I was going to go. I'm going to share again, because I want to touch on that imposter syndrome. That imposter syndrome, and let me go ahead in full transparency, I have had it, and every now and then it'll tap me on the shoulder again. The imposter syndrome comes in this esteem part. If you've gone for, we adults, we have almost all the things we need down here. We get up here to this esteem part. Now we start wondering, do I really know what I'm talking about? As we stand in front of a council or a boardroom meeting, you start feeling that. Do I really know what I'm talking about? Am I really who I say I am? Am I just pretending? That imposter syndrome is a beast. Right? And then, but if you have this self-esteem, you have this respect for yourself. This is where a lot of my more spiritual people will talk about doing light work and doing dark work, where you learn to accept who you are, the good and the bad.
Yep.
And
that's all I talk about is integrating the shadow. You won't fear the shadow when you begin to understand that light, the result of light shining in your life is a shadow. Light is going to cast a shadow, but the shadow is a projection. It's a reflection. If you can integrate the shadow man, then you can protect yourself from your own projections in that way.
Definitely. And so,
and it's just acceptance. What you said, it's just acceptance.
And so, to go back to the main questions that you asked, and we touched on so much.
Yeah, I love it.
Why are Black teachers leaving the field? And I didn't pull this graphic, but I looked at it. And in 2022, every ethnic group, white, Asian, Hispanic, Native, Indigenous, Pacific Islander, every single one, by some increment, included the increase of teachers of that ethnicity or that culture in the system. Largest group still being white, except for Black teachers.
Wow.
We were the only ethnic group that lost more teachers
Okay,
than
two
came
things.
in. Let's go.
Do you think, one, that we are losing teachers because of the education gap between Black men and Black women?
Good question. To be honest, I don't have an answer for that. I can see kind of where you're going with it, but I'm not sure exactly how that would fit with that education gap. I'm not 100% sure. Expound on it for me a little. Maybe I can.
Well, you've got fewer Black men graduating from college in general. That number is declining. So, of course, if you're not even going to college or graduating from college, you ain't going to end up in nobody's classroom as an educator. The pool of applicants, at that point would be smaller. And there's no incentive. It's not like they've got programs out. I saw one here recently that just popped up where they were saying they were going to give extra incentives to Black men to be teachers, but that's not like a widespread thing.
Right. And yeah, there are some incentives out there. Actually, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, Aggie Pride, they had a great incentive program, which actually was one of the reasons why I went into the special education program. Just a quick note for full transparency. When I went into special education, I did so with the intention to never teach a special education class. I went into special education to learn the special education techniques to take back to the charter school where I was working, and so I could disseminate them throughout all of my students in all of the classes.
Yeah.
Things didn't work out. We won't get to that part. And so I wound up going to another school. But, there are those things.
Do you think one of the proponents of nation building, we know we need schools, we need banks, so do you think also this lack of growth with the Black male teachers is coming from a community aspect of kind of like the shrinking of the Black community, in that we're outsourcing so many of our basic functions that we need for a nation?
Definitely. Think about it this way. Let's for a second say that desegregation never happened. Remove every Black person from every industry right now, entertainment, sports, science, medicine, all that. Remove that from the mainstream and concentrate them in one spot. Say Texas, because I know they would love that to happen in Texas.
I'm done with you.
Right.
Right.
And now you don't just have a Black Wall Street, you have almost a full Black state, right?
You have the Renaissance, you have the Harlem Renaissance, you have the talented 10th, you have everything you need.
Right. So if we did that, and if that had happened, Black people still would have risen. Sports, entertainment, medicine, science, engineering, architecture would have been an amazing thing.
Yeah, and we would have led other people in their industries, because some of the mediocrity that I see that's plaguing really all of society is coming from the fact that they don't put that energy into seeing how well we will do culturally on our own.
They, in fact, do the exact opposite. They
dilute it.
Not just dilute it, but prevent it. You can, if we go to the military, almost every war up until recently, it was Black soldiers can't fight, yada, 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 until it was an absolute need. And now it's switched to the point where the military is very heavily people of color,
Yeah. We've always got so much to prove, so we're going to arise to the challenge of the excellence. But in keeping with your schedule, I thank you ever so much. We can do this all night. I thank you all night long, all night. Oh, I'm sorry. It ain't the Wireless Woman if they don't get a music montage.
Well, there you go. I'm not mad at that.
I'm going to have you back.
Let me say one last thing. And because whenever we speak, I like to speak on this. Two things, actually. One, solution to finding more black male teachers. Go to the jail. Get the corrections officers. Go to the group homes. Get the counselors. Go to whatever sports complex you want. Get the coaches, the assistant coaches. Go to the psychology and sociology departments. Find those black males who are going out to do good, because there are so many of them. Black women too.
Yeah, I'm
And
going into sociology. So.
there you go. Go to find these people who are doing this great work on their own and get them to become teachers, because they can do both. Give them the correct support. Somebody with a sociology degree can do their sociology in a classroom, psychology in a classroom. Their law enforcement or corrections, get them before they even get to the prison. A lot of those jobs are heavily male and black at the trench level and not so much at the administrative level. Go get them.
And very true, because if you can get more of them in the classroom, you won't need them in the prison anyway.
That's where I came from. I came from mental health background, developmental disabilities background, worked in group homes, detention centers, locked psychiatric facilities. And there's a plethora of black men in there, because those jobs they give us, easy to get, because it's about physicality as well as knowing enough to follow the precautions and procedures needed to deal with those individuals with those special needs. Go get them. And last thing, black men and black women, forget about this education gap thing going on. Y'all just need to go ahead and start loving each other.
There we go.
Stop fighting. We done
That's
talked
a
about
word
that
right
before.
there.
Gotta
you
say
know,
that.
we gotta say that. We came on this channel, and we, as the chosen gladiator from our group, we squashed that. We gave each other love. So I'm gonna send you off in love and say thank you ever so much for being here tonight and sharing your charts and graphs and PowerPoint presentations, because you really drive to the point how important this is. And in a platform where so many people are talking about stuff that has nothing to do with the next generation and our children, I'm so grateful to have you here to really share from first person perspective, and also to have that education in that area to say, hey, here's someone that we can talk to about this. So I love you, Elliot. You know this, and I will have you back. And you have a good night.
You as well. I'm always at your disposal. And what do you call them? The Wi-Fi's?
My Wi-Fi's, yes. So thank you
y'all
ever so much
for tuning in and being with us.
Absolutely. And make sure that you do follow Elliot on the social media platforms that he does have. He's quite unplugged like me, but you have several events and things that are coming up. So make sure you link with him so that we can follow and support him. Good night, Elliot.
Good night.
All right. So for my Wi-Fi's, I thank you for coming in. I definitely want you to leave some comments. I have several links that are in the description box that go to some of the things that Elliot brought up, because people love to jump in comments and start talking about what ain't facts. Do your own research. We come here to put our perspectives forward, to give you a different perspective to think about things. I know when I first came to Elliot, I was vexed at them teachers talking to my son, but he said it, talking about my son the way that they were, but he said, it's not bad to be able to go into the situation and rule it out. And if there are some other things that they can bring into the dynamic of understanding how he learns, you can't just decide, and they can't just decide, like he said at the top of the live, what his learning styles, strengths or weaknesses may be. So, talking to an educator even gave me a difference of perspective as far as what the goals of the system is. Now, let's not get it twisted up. And thank you, Rashawn, for sticking in here with us. Let's not get it twisted up. There is a system There is systematic oppression that is being pushed out through our education systems. But we have to have people on the inside of every system that can begin to help us deconstruct what it's made of, so that we know how to arm ourselves and our children as we're sending them into these arsenals of, education. Like, how do you get up every day, wash your kid's face, put on the nicest clothes, and send them out to a school and never be fully concerned about what their experience inside of the schools are, what the teachers' experiences are? We know that a lot of isms, propaganda was spread through education in Nazi Germany, when he talked about the different education systems that Jewish people have, that, Asian people have in all of these different communities. Their children are coming out being more equipped when they are in these segregated systems to compete with the master class, if you will. They're coming out with contributions to make to society, and we have children. I talked about it in my God Facebook. I keep telling y'all need to go get that book, okay? And I talked about having the engineering ability of pyramid builders hidden in despondent Black children. We don't even know what the untapped potential is in these Black children. So we really, really need to begin to focus in as a component of our nation building on our educational systems. And I'm so grateful to have brothers, Black dedicated brothers like Elliot, who has actually had to leave the profession. And you can still hear his passion for teaching and educating his people. And it ain't going to be lost on us, baby. It ain't gonna be lost on us, because if he can't do nothing but come in here and teach me something that I can use for my children, then that's what's gonna happen. So thank you all for being with us tonight. You already know, drop that fire headphones emoji in the comments. I look forward to engaging with you there. But until the next time, you're dismissed from actual real class today. I'll see y'all in those comments. Good night.